Hello, my friends, it's Indiana Holmes again, and tonight we continue The Red House Mystery by A.A. Milne. And tonight we start with Chapter 4, The Brother from Australia. Guests at the Red House were allowed to do what they liked within reason, the reasonableness or otherwise of it being decided by Mark. But when once they, or Mark, had made up their minds as to what they wanted to do, the plan had to be kept. Mrs. Calladine, who knew this little weakness of their host's, resisted, therefore, the suggestion of Bill that they should have a second round in the afternoon and drive home comfortably after tea. The other golfers were willing enough, but Mrs. Calladine, without actually saying that Mr. Ablett wouldn't like it, was firm on the point that, having arranged to be back by 4, they should be back by 4. "I really don't think Mark wants us, you know," said the Major. Having played badly in the morning, he wanted to prove himself in the afternoon, that he was really better than that. With this brother of his coming, he'll be only too glad to have us out of the way. "Of course he will, Major." This from Bill. "You'd like to play, wouldn't you, Miss Norris?" Miss Norris looked doubtfully at the hostess. "Of course, if you want to go back, dear, we mustn't keep you here. Besides, it's so dull for you not playing." "Just 9 holes, Mother?" pleaded Betty. "The car wouldn't take you back, and you could tell them that they were having another round, and then it could come back for us," said Bill brilliantly. "It's certainly much cooler here than I expected, but," put in the Major. Mrs. Calladine fell. It was very pleasantly cool outside the golf house, and of course Mark would be rather glad to have them out of the way, so she consented to 9 holes, and the match having ended all square, and everybody having played much better than in the morning, they drove back to the Red House, very well pleased with themselves. "Hello," said Bill to himself, as they approached the house. "Isn't that old Tony?" Anthony was standing in front of the house, waiting for them. Bill waved, and he waved back. Then, as the car drew up, Bill, who was in front with the chauffeur, jumped down and greeted him eagerly. "Hello, you madman. Have you come to stay, or what?" He had a sudden idea. "Don't say you're Mark Ablett's long-lost brother from Australia, though I could quite believe it of you," he laughed boyishly. "Hello, Bill," said Anthony quietly. "Will you introduce me? I'm afraid I've got bad news." Bill, rather sobered by this, introduced him. The Major and Mrs. Calladine were on the near side of the car, and Anthony spoke to them in a low voice. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to give you rather a shock," he said. "Robert Ablett, Mr. Mark Ablett's brother, has been killed." He jerked a thumb over his shoulder in the house. "Good God," said the Major. "Do you mean that he has killed himself?" asked Mrs. Calladine. "Just now?" "It was about 2 hours ago. It happened to come here." He half turned to Beverly and explained. "I was coming to see you, Bill, and I arrived just after the death. Mr. Cayley and I found the body. Mr. Cayley being busy just now, there are police and doctors and so on in the house. He asked me to tell you. He says that no doubt you would prefer, the house party having been broken up in this tragic way, to leave as soon as possible." He gave a pleasant, apologetic little smile and went on. "I'm putting it badly, but what he means, of course, is that you must consult your own feelings in the matter entirely, and please make your own arrangements about ordering the car for whatever train you wish to catch. There is one coming this evening, understand, which you could go by if you wished it." Bill gazed with open mouth at Anthony. He had no words in his vocabulary to express what he wanted to say, other than those the Major had already used. Betty was leaning across to Miss Norris and saying, "Who's killed?" in an awestruck voice, and Miss Norris, who was instinctively looking as tragic as she looked on stage when a messenger announced the death of one of the cast, stopped for a moment in order to explain. Mrs. Calladine was quietly mistress of herself. "We shall be in the way, yes. I quite understand," she said. "But we can't just shake the dust off, place our shoes, because something terrible has happened here. I must see Mark, and can we arrange later what to do? He must know how very deeply we feel for him. Perhaps we—" She hesitated. "The Major and I might be useful anyway," said Bill. "Isn't that what you mean, Mrs. Calladine?" "Where is Mark?" said the Major suddenly, looking hard at Antony. Antony looked back unwaveringly and said nothing. "I think," said the Major gently, leaning over to Mrs. Calladine, "that it would be better if you took Betty back to London tonight." "Very well," she agreed quietly. "You will come with us, Ruth." "I'll see you safely there," said Bill in a meek voice. He didn't quite know what was happening, and having expected to stay at the Red House for another week, he had nowhere to go in London. But London seemed to be the place that everyone was going to go to. And when he could get to Tony alone for a moment, Tony, no doubt, would explain. "Cayley wants you to stay, Bill. You have to go anyhow, tomorrow." "Major Rumbold?" "Yes, I'll come with you, Mrs. Calladine. Mr. Cayley would wish me to say again that you will please not hesitate to give your own orders, both as regard to the car and as regard to any telephoning or telegraphing that you want done." He smiled again and added, "Please forgive me if I seem to have taken a good deal upon myself, but I just happen to be handy as a mouthpiece for Cayley." He bowed to them and went into the house. "Well," said Miss Norris dramatically. As Antony re-entered the hall, the inspector from Middleton was just crossing into the library with Cayley. The latter stopped and nodded to Antony. "Wait a moment, Inspector. Here's Mr. Gillingham. He'd better come with us." And then to Antony, "This is Inspector Birch." Birch looked inquiringly from one to another. "Mr. Gillingham and I found the body together," explained Cayley. "Oh, well, come along. Let's get the facts sorted out in a bit." "I'd like to know where I am, Mr. Gillingham." "We all do." "Oh," he looked at Antony with interest. "Do you know where you are in this case?" "I know where I'm going to be." "Where's that?" "Put through it by Inspector Birch," said Antony with a smile. The inspector laughed genially. "Well, I'll spare you as much as I can. Come along." They went into the library. The inspector seated himself at a writing table, and Cayley sat in a chair by the side of it. Antony made himself comfortable in the armchair and prepared to be interested. "We'll start with the dead man," said the inspector. Robert Ablett, didn't you say?" He took out his notebook. "Yes, brother of Mark Ablett, who lives here." "Ah." He began to sharpen a pencil. "Staying in the house?" "Oh, no." Antony listened attentively while Cayley explained all that he knew about Robert. This was news to him. "I see. Sent out of the country in disgrace? What had he done?" "I hardly know. I was only about 12 at the time. The sort of age when you're told not to ask questions." "Inconvenient questions?" "Exactly." "So you don't really know whether he had been merely wild or wicked?" "No. Old Mr. Ablett was a clergyman," added Cayley. "Perhaps what might seem wicked to a clergyman might seem only wild to a man of the world." "I dare say, Mr. Cayley," smiled the inspector. "Anyhow, it was more convenient to have him in Australia?" "Yes." "Mark Ablett never talked about him. Hardly ever. He was very much ashamed of him, and, well, very glad he was in Australia." "Did he write Mark sometimes?" "Occasionally, perhaps 3 or 4 times in the last 5 years." "Asking for money?" "Sometimes of the sort. I don't think Mark always answered them. As far as I know, he never sent any money. Now, your own private opinion, Mr. Cayley. Do you think that Mark was unfair to his brother? Unduly hard on him?" They never liked each other as boys. There was never any affection between them. I don't know whose fault it was in the first place, if anybody's. Still, Mark might have given him a hand. I understand, said Cayley. That Robert spent his whole life asking for hands. The inspector nodded. I know that sort. Well, now, we'll go on to this morning. This letter that Mark got, did you see it? Not at the time. He showed it to me afterwards. Any address? No, a half sheet of rather dirty paper. Where is it now? I don't know. In Mark's pocket, I expect. Ah, he pulled at his beard. Well, we'll come to that. Can you remember what it said? As far as I remember, something like this. Mark, your loving brother is coming to see you tomorrow, all the way from Australia. I give you warning so that you will be able to conceal your surprise, but not hope, your pleasure. Expect him at 3 or thereabouts. Ah, the inspector copied it down carefully. Did you notice the postmark? London. And what was Mark's attitude? Annoyance? Disgust? Cayley hesitated. Apprehension. No, not exactly. Or rather, apprehension, an unpleasant interview, not of any unpleasant outcome for himself. You mean that he wasn't afraid of violence or blackmail or anything of that sort? He didn't appear to be, right? Now then, he arrived, you say, about 3 o'clock? Yes, about that. Who was in the house then? Mark and myself and some of the servants. I don't know which. Of course, you will ask them directly, no doubt. With your permission. No guests? They were out all day playing golf, explained Cayley. Oh, by the way, he put in, if I may interrupt a moment, will you want to see them at all? It isn't very pleasant for them now, naturally, and I suggest, he turned to Anthony, who nodded back to him. I understand that they want to go back to London this evening. There's no objection to that, I suppose. You will let me have their names and addresses in case I want to communicate with them. Of course. One of them is staying on, if you would like to see him on later. But they only came back from the golf course as we crossed the hall. That's all right, Mr. Cayley. Well, now then, let's get back to 3 o'clock. Where were you when Robert arrived? Cayley explained how he had been sitting in the hall, how Audrey had asked him where the master was, and how he said that he had last seen him going up to the temple. She went away, and I went on with my book. There was a step on the stairs, and I looked up to see Mark coming down. He went into the office, and I went on with my book again. I went into the library for a minute to refer to another book, and when I was there, I heard the shot. At least, it was a loud bang. I wasn't sure if it was a shot. I stood and listened. Then I came slowly to the door and looked out. Then I went back, hesitated a bit, and finally decided to go across to the office and make sure that it was all right. I turned the handle of the door and found it was locked. Then I got frightened, and I banged on the door and I shouted, and, well, that was when Mr. Gillingham arrived. He went on to explain how they had found the body. The inspector looked at him with a smile. Yes, well, we shall have to go over some of that again, Mr. Cayley. Mr. Mark, now, you thought he was in the temple. Could you have come in and gone up to his room without your seeing him? There are back stairs. He wouldn't have used them in an ordinary way, of course, but I wasn't in the hall all the afternoon. He might easily have gone upstairs without my knowing anything about it. So that you weren't surprised when you saw him coming down? Oh, no, not a bit. Well, did he say anything? He said, Robert's here, or something of the sort. I suppose he heard the bell, or the voices in the hall. Which way does the bedroom face? Could he have seen him coming down the drive? He might have, yes. Well, then I said yes, and he gave a sort of shrug and said, don't go too far away. I might want you, and then went in. What did you think he meant by that? Well, he consults me a good deal, I'm his sort of unofficial solicitor in a kind of way. This was a business meeting rather than a brotherly one. Oh, yes, that's how he regarded it, I'm sure. Yes. How long was it before you heard the shot? Very soon, 2 minutes perhaps. The inspector finished his writing and then regarded Cayley thoughtfully. Suddenly he said, "What is your theory of Robert's death?" Cayley shrugged his shoulders. "You've probably seen more than I've seen," he answered. "It's your job. I can only speak as a layman and Mark's friend." "Well, then I should say that Robert came here meaning trouble and bringing a revolver with him. He produced it almost at once. Mark tried to get it from him. There was a little struggle, perhaps, and it went off. Mark lost his head, finding himself there with a revolver in his hand and a dead man at his feet. His one idea was to escape. He locked the door almost instinctively, and then he heard me hammering at it. Went out the window." "Yes. Well, that sounds reasonable enough. What do you say, Mr. Gillingham?" "I should hardly call it reasonable to lose your head," said Antony, getting up from his chair and coming towards them. "Well, you know what I mean. It explains things." "Oh, yes. Any other explanation would make them much more complicated. Have you any other explanation?" "Not I. Are there any points on which you would like to correct Mr. Cayley? Anything he might have left out when you arrived here?" "No, thanks. He described it very accurately." "Ah, well. Now, about yourself. You're not staying in the house, I gather." Antony explained his previous movements. "Yes. Did you hear the shot?" Antony put his head down on one side as if listening. "Yes, just as I came in the sight of the house. I didn't make any impression on me, but I remember it now." "Where were you then?" "Coming up the drive. I was just in sight of the house. Nobody left the house by the front door or after the shot." Antony closed his eyes and considered. "Nobody," he said. "No." "You're certain of that?" "Absolutely," said Antony, as though rather surprised that he could be suspected of a mistake. "Thank you. You're at the George, if I want you?" "Mr. Gillingham is staying here until after the inquest," explained Cayley. "Good. Well now, about these servants." That's the end of chapter 4. Okay, now on to chapter 5. Mr. Gillingham chooses a new profession. As Cayley went over the bell, Antony got up and moved to the door. "Well, you won't want me, I suppose, Inspector," he said. "No, thank you, Mr. Gillingham. You'll be about, of course." "Oh, yes." The inspector hesitated. "I think, Mr. Cayley, it would be better if I saw the servants alone. You know what they are. The more people about, the more they get alarmed. I expect I can get at the truth better myself." "Oh, quite so. In fact, I was going to ask you to excuse me. I feel rather responsible toward these guests of ours, although Mr. Gillingham very kindly." He smiled at Antony, who was waiting at the door, and left his sentence unfinished. "Ah, that reminds me," said the inspector. "Didn't you say that one of your guests, Mr. Beverley, was it, a friend of Mr. Gillingham's, was staying on?" "Yes. Would you like to see him?" "Afterwards, if I may." "I'll warn him. I shall be up in my room if you want me. I have a room upstairs where I work. Any of the servants will show you. Ah, Stevens, Inspector Birch would like to ask you a few questions." "Yes, sir," said Audrey primly, but inwardly fluttering. The housekeeper's room had heard something of the news by this time, and Audrey had a busy time explaining to the other members of the staff exactly what he had said and what she had said. The details were not quite established yet, but this much at least was certain, that Mr. Mark's brother had shot himself and spirited Mr. Mark away, and that Audrey had seen at once that he was that sort of man when she opened the door to him. She had passed the remark to Mrs. Stevens, and Mrs. Stevens, if you remember, Audrey had always said that people didn't go away to Australia except for very good reasons. Elise agreed with both of them, but she had a contribution of her own to make. She had actually heard Mr. Mark in the office threatening his brother. You mean Mr. Robert?" said the second parlor maid. She had been having a little nap in her room, but she had heard the bang. In fact, it had woken her up. Just like something going off, it was. It was Mr. Mark's voice, said Elise firmly. Pleading for mercy, said an eager-eyed kitchen maid, hopefully from the door, and was hurried out again by the others, wishing that she had not given her presents away. But it was hard to listen to the silence when she knew so well from her novelettes just what happened on these occasions. I shall have to give that girl a piece of my mind, said Mrs. Stevens. Well, Elise, he said, I heard him say it with my own ears. It's my turn now, he said, triumphant-like. Well, if you think that's a threat, dear, you're very particular, I must say. But Audrey remembered Elise's words when she was in front of the Inspector Birch. She gave her own evidence with the readiness of one who had already repeated it several times and was examined and cross-examined by the inspector with considerable skill. The temptation to say, never mind about what you said to him, was strong, but he resisted it, knowing that in this way he would discover best what he said to her. By this time, both his words and the looks he gave her were getting their full value from Audrey, but the general meaning of them seemed to be well established. Then you didn't see Mr. Mark at all? No, sir. He must have come in before and gone up to his room, or come in by the front door, likely enough, and while I was going back up. Yes, well, I think that's all I want to know. Thank you very much. Now, what about the other servants? Elise heard the master and Mr. Robert talking together, said Audrey eagerly. He was saying, Mr. Mark, I mean... Ah, well, I think Elise had better tell me that herself. Who is Elise, by the way? One of the household maids. Shall I send her to you, sir? Please. Elise was not sorry to get the message. It interrupted a few remarks from Mr. Stevens about Elise's conduct that afternoon, which were, Elise thought, much better interrupted. In Mrs. Stevens' opinion, any crime committed that afternoon in the office was nothing to the double crime committed by the unhappy Elise. For Elise realized too late that she would have done better to have said nothing about her presence in the hall that afternoon. She was bad at concealing the truth, and Mrs. Stevens was good at discovering it. Elise knew perfectly well that she had no business to come down the front stairs, and it was no excuse to say that she happened to come out of Miss Norris's room, just at the head of the stairs, and didn't think it would matter, as there was nobody in the hall, and what she was doing anyhow in Miss Norris's room at that time. Returning a magazine lent by Miss Norris might well ask. Well, not exactly lent. Really, Elise, and this in a respectable house. In vain from poor Elise to plead that a story by her favorite author was advertised on the cover, with a picture of the villain falling over a cliff. That's where you'll go to, my girl, if you aren't careful, said Mrs. Stevens firmly. But of course, there was no need to confess all these crimes to Inspector Birch. All that interested him was that she was passing through the hall and heard voices in the office, and stopped to listen? Certainly not, said Elise with dignity, feeling that nobody really understood her. I was just passing through the hall, just as you might have been yourself, and not supposing they was talking secrets, didn't think to stop my ears, as no doubt ought to have done, and she sniffed slightly. Come, said the inspector soothingly. I didn't mean to suggest. Everyone is very kind to me, said Elise between sniffs, and there's that poor man lying dead there. And sorry they'd have been, if it had been me, to have spoken to me as they have done this day. Nonsense, you're going to be very proud of you. We're going to be very proud of you. I shouldn't be surprised if your evidence were of very great importance. Now then, what was it you heard? Try to remember the exact words. Something about working in a passage, thought Elise. Yes, but who said it? Mr. Robert? How do you know it was Mr. Robert? Had you heard his voice before? I don't take it upon myself to say that I had any acquaintance with Mr. Robert, but seeing that it wasn't Mr. Mark, nor yet Mr. Cayley, nor any other of the gentlemen, and Miss Stevens had shown Mr. Robert into the office not 5 minutes before. Quite so, said the inspector hurriedly. Mr. Robert, undoubtedly. Working in a passage? That was what it sounded like, sir. Working a passage over. Could that have been it? That's right, sir, said Elise eagerly. He'd worked his passage over. Well, and then Mr. Mark said loudly, sort of triumphant-like, "It's my turn now. You wait." Triumphantly? As much as to say his chance had come. And that's all you heard? That's all, sir. Not standing there listening, but just passing through the hall, as it might be any time. Yes, well, that's really very important, Elise. Thank you. Elise gave him a smile and returned eagerly to the kitchen. She was ready for Mrs. Stevens, or anybody now. Meanwhile, Antony had been exploring on his own. There was a point which was puzzling him. He went through the hall and to the front of the house and stood at the open door, looking out to the drive. He and Cayley had run around the house to the left. Surely it would have been quicker to have run around to the right. The front door was not in the middle of the house, it was on the end. Undoubtedly, they went the longest way round. But perhaps there was something in the way. If one went to the right, a wall, say. He strolled off in that direction, followed a path round the house, and came in sight of the office windows. Quite simple, and about half the distance of the other way. He went on a little further and came to a door just beyond the broken windows. It opened easily, and he found himself in a passage. At the end of the passage was another door. He opened it and found himself in the hall again. And, of course, that's the quickest way of the three, he said to himself. Through the hall and out the back, turn to the left, and there you are. Instead of which, we ran the longest way around the house. Why? Was it to give Mark more time in which to escape? Only in that case. Why run? Also, how did Cayley know that it was Mark who was trying to escape? If he had guessed, well, not guessed, but been afraid that one had shot the other, it was much more likely that Robert had shot Mark. Indeed, he had admitted that this was what he thought. The first thing he had said when he turned the body over was, "Thank God! I was afraid it was Mark." But why should he want to give Robert time in which to get away? And again, why run if he didn't want to give him time? Antony went out of the house again to the lawns and at the back and sat down on a bench in view of the office windows. "Now then," he said, "let's go through Cayley's mind carefully and see what we get." Cayley had been in the hall when Robert was shown into the office. The servants go off to look for Mark, and Cayley goes on with his book. Mark comes down the stairs, warns Cayley to stand by in case he is wanted, and goes to meet his brother. What does Cayley expect? Possibly he won't be wanted at all? Possibly that his advice may be wanted in the matter? Say of paying Robert's debts or getting him a passage back to Australia? Possibly that his physical assistance might be wanted to get an obstreperous Robert out of the house? Well, he sits there for a moment and then goes on to the library. Why not? He is still within reach. If wanted, suddenly he hears a pistol shot. A pistol shot is the last noise you'd expect to hear in a country house. Very naturally, then, that for the moment he would hardly realize what it was. He listens and hears nothing more. Perhaps it was a pistol shot after all. After a moment or two, he goes to the library door again. The profound silence makes him uneasy now. Was it a pistol shot? Absurd. Still no harm in going to the office on some excuse, just to reassure himself. So he tries the door and finds it locked. What are his emotions now? Alarm? Uncertainty? Something is happening. Incredible though it seems, it must have been a pistol shot. A pistol shot for sure. He is banging at the door and calling out to Mark, and there is no answer. Alarm, yes. But alarm for whose safety? Mark's, obviously. Robert is a stranger. Mark is an intimate friend. Robert has written a letter that morning, and the letter of the man in the dangerous temper. Robert is the tougher customer. Mark, the highly civilized man. If there has been a quarrel, it is Robert who is shot by Mark. He bangs at the door again. Of course, to Anthony, coming suddenly upon the scene, Cayley's conduct had seemed rather absurd, but then, just for a moment, Cayley had lost his head. Anybody else might have done the same. But as soon as Anthony suggested trying the windows, Cayley saw that that was an obvious thing to do. So he leads the way to the windows, the longest way. Why? To give the murderer time to escape? If he had thought then that Mark was the murderer, perhaps yes, but he thinks that Robert is the murderer. If he is not hiding anything, he must think so. Indeed, he says so. When does he see the body? I was afraid it was Mark, he says. When he finds that it is Robert who is killed. No reason, then, for wishing to gain time. On the contrary, every instinct would urge him to get into the room as quickly as possible and seize the wicked Robert. Yet he goes the longest way around. Why? And then, why run? That's the question, said Anthony to himself as he filled his pipe. And bless me if I know the answer. It may be, of course, that Cayley is just a coward. He is in no hurry to get close to Robert's revolver, and yet wanted me to think that he was bursting with eagerness. That would explain it. But then that makes Cayley out a coward. Is he? At any rate, he pushed his face up against the window bravely enough. No, I want a better answer than that. He sat there with his unlit pipe in his hand, thinking there were one or two things in the back of his brain waiting to be taken out and looked at. For a moment, he left them undisturbed. They would come back to him later when he wanted them. He laughed suddenly and lit his pipe. I was wanting to get a new profession, he thought, and now I found it. Anthony Gillingham, our own private sleuth hound. I shall begin today. Whatever Anthony Gillingham had other qualifications for, was there any qualifications for this new profession? He had, at any rate, a brain which worked clearly and quickly, and this clear brain of his had already told him that he was the only person in the house at the moment who was unhandicapped in the search for truth. The inspector had arrived in it to find a man dead and a man missing. It was extremely probable, no doubt, that the missing man had shot the dead man. But it was more than extremely probable. It was almost certain that the inspector would start with the idea that this extremely probable solution was the one true solution, and that in consequence he would be less disposed to consider without prejudice any other solution. As regards all the rest of them, Cayley, the guests, the servants, they were all prejudiced in favor of Mark, or possibly, for all he knew, against Mark, in favor of or against each other. They had formed some previous opinion from what had been said that morning. Of course, the sort of man Robert was played into it. No one of them could consider the matter with an unbiased mind, but Anthony could. He knew nothing about Mark. He knew nothing about Robert. He had seen the dead man before he was told who the dead man was. He knew that a tragedy had happened before he knew that anybody was missing. Those first impressions, which are so vitally important, had been received solely on the merits of the case. They were founded on the evidence of his senses, not on the evidence of his emotions or the other people's senses. He was in a much better position for getting the truth than the inspector was. It is possible that, in thinking this, Antony was doing Inspector Birch a slight injustice. Birch was certainly prepared to believe that Mark had shot his brother. Robert had been shown into the office, witness Audrey. Mark had gone in to Robert, witness Kaylee. Mark and Robert had been heard talking, witness Elise. There was a shot, witness everybody. The room had been entered and Robert's body had been found, witness Kaylee and Gillingham. And Mark was missing. Obviously then, Mark had killed his brother, accidentally as Kaylee believed, or deliberately as Elise's evidence seemed to suggest. There was no point in looking for a difficult solution to a problem when the easy solution had no flaws in it. But at the same time, Birch would have preferred the different solution, simply because there was more credit attached to it. A sensational arrest of somebody in the house would have given him more pleasure than a commonplace pursuit of Mark Ablett cross country. Mark must be found, guilty or not, but there were other possibilities. I would have been interested Antony to know that, just at the time when he was feeling rather superior to the prejudiced inspector. The inspector himself was letting his mind dwell lovingly upon the possibilities in connection with Mr. Gillingham. Was it only a coincidence that Mr. Gillingham had turned up just when he did, and Mr. Beverley's curious answers when asked for some account of his friend? An assistant in a tobacconist's, a waiter, an odd man, Mr. Gillingham. Evidently, it might be as well to keep an eye on him. And that is the end of chapter 5. Now we go on to chapter 6. Chapter 6, Outside or Inside? The guests had said goodbye to Kaylee, according to their different manner. The major, gruff and simple. If you want me, command me. Anything can do. Goodbye. Betty, silently sympathetic, with everything in her large eyes, which she was too much overawed to tell. Mrs. Calladine protesting that she did not know what to say, but apparently finding plenty, and Miss Morris crowding so much into one despairing gesture that Kaylee's unvarying "thank you very much" might have been taken this time as gratitude for an artistic entertainment. Bill had seen them into the car, had taken his own farewells with a special squeeze of the hand for Betty, and had wandered out to join Antony, on his garden seat. "Well, this is a rum show," said Bill as he sat down. "Very rum, William. And you actually walked right into it." "Right into it," said Antony. "Then you're the man I want. There are all sorts of rumors and mysteries about, and that inspector fellow simply wouldn't keep to the point when I wanted to ask him about the murder, or whatever it is. He kept asking me questions about where I'd met you first, and all sorts of dull things like that. Now, what really happened?" Antony told him as concisely as he could all that he had already told the inspector, Bill interrupting him here and there with appropriate "good lords" and whistles. "I say, it's a bit of a business, isn't it? Where do I come in exactly?" "How do you mean?" "Well, everybody else is bundled off except me, and I get to push through it by the inspector as if I knew all about it. What's the idea?" Antony smiled. "Well, there's nothing to worry about. You know, naturally, Birch wanted to see one of you so as to know what you'd all been doing each and every hour of the day. And Kaylee was nice enough to think that you'd be company for me, as I knew you'd already been. And, well, that's all. You're staying here in the house? Said Bill eagerly. Good man, that's splendid. It reconciles you to the departure of some of the others. Bill blushed. Oh, well, I shall see her again next week, anyway, he murmured. I congratulate you. I liked her books. And that gray dress. A nice, comfortable sort of woman. You fool, that's her mother. Oh, I beg your pardon. But anyway, Bill, I want you more than she does just now. So try and put up with me. I say, do you really? Said Bill, rather flattered. He had a great admiration for Antony and was very proud to be liked by him. Yes, you see, things are going to happen here soon. Inquests and that sort of thing. Well, perhaps something before that. Hello, here comes Kaylee. Kaylee was walking across the lawn towards them, a big, heavy-shouldered man, with one of the strong, clean-shaven, ugly faces which can never be quite called plain. Bad luck on Kaylee, said Bill. I say, ought to tell him how sorry I am, and all that sort of thing. It seems so dashed and inadequate. I shouldn't bother, said Antony. Kaylee nodded as he came to them, and stood there for a moment. We can make room for you, said Bill, getting up. Oh, don't bother. Thanks. I just came to say, he went on to Antony, that naturally they've rather lost their heads in the kitchen, and dinner won't be 8:30. Do just as you like about dressing, of course. And what about your luggage? Oh, I thought Bill and I would take a walk over to the inn directly and see about it. The car can go over and fetch it as soon as it comes back from the station. It's very good of you, but I shall go over it myself. Anyhow, to pack up and pay my bills, and besides, it's a good evening for a walk. If you wouldn't mind it, Bill. I should love it. Well then, if you leave the bag there, I'll send the car around for it later. Thanks very much. Having said what he wanted to say, Kaylee remained there a little awkwardly, as if not sure whether to go or to stay. Antony wondered whether he wanted to talk about the afternoon's happenings or whether it was just one subject he wished to avoid. To break the silence, he asked carelessly if the inspector had gone. Kaylee nodded. Then he said abruptly, He's getting a warrant for Mark's arrest. Bill made a suitably sympathetic noise, and Antony said with a shrug of the shoulders, Well, he was bound to do that, wasn't he? It doesn't follow that, well, it doesn't mean anything, I guess. There's naturally want to get hold of your cousin, innocent or guilty. Which do you think he is, Mr. Gillingham? Said Kaylee coolly, looking at him steadily. Mark? It's absurd, said Bill impetuously. Bill's loyal, you see, Mr. Kaylee. You wouldn't owe no loyalty to anyone concerned. Exactly, so perhaps I might be too frank. Bill had dropped down on the grass, and Kaylee took his place on the seat and sat there heavily, his elbows on his knees, his chin on his hands, gazing at the ground. I want to be quite frank, he said at last. Naturally, I'm prejudiced where Mark is concerned, so I want to know how my suggestion strikes you, who have no prejudices either way. Your suggestion? My theory that if Mark killed his brother, it was purely accidental, as I told the inspector. Bill looked up with interest. You mean that Robert did the hold-up business, he said, and there was a bit of a struggle, and the revolver went off, and then Mark lost his head and bolted? That sort of idea? Exactly. Well, that seems all right. He turned to Antony. There's nothing wrong with that, is there? It's the most natural explanation to anyone who knows Mark. Antony pulled out his pipe. I suppose it is, he said slowly. But there's one thing that worries me rather... What's that? Bill and Kaylee asked the question simultaneously. The key. The key, said Bill. Kaylee lifted his head and looked at Antony. What about the key, he asked. Well, There may be nothing in it. I was just wondering. Suppose Robert was killed, as you say, and suppose Mark lost his head and thought of nothing but getting away before anyone could see him. Well, very likely he'd lock the door and put the key in his pocket. He'd do it without thinking, just to gain a moment's time. Yes, that's what I suggest. It seems sound enough, said Bill. Sort of thing you do without thinking. Besides, if you're going to run, it gives you more of a chance. Yes, that's right, if the key is there. But suppose it isn't there. The suggestion, made as if it were already an established fact, startled them both. They looked at him wonderingly. What do you mean? Said Cayley. Well, it's just a question of where people happen to keep their keys. You go up to your bedroom, and perhaps you like to lock your door in case anybody comes wandering in when you've only got one sock and a pair of braces on. Well, that's natural enough. And if you look around the bedrooms of almost any house, you'll find the keys all ready, so that you can lock yourself in a moment's notice. But downstairs, people don't lock themselves in. It's really never done at all. Bill, for instance, has never locked himself into the dining room in order to be alone with the sherry. On the other hand, all women, and particularly servants, have a horror of burglars. And if a burglar gets in by the windows, they like to limit his activities to that particular room. So they keep the keys on the outside of the doors and lock the doors when they go to bed. He knocked the ashes out of his pipe and added, "At least my mother always used to." You mean, said Bill excitedly, that the key was on the outside of the door when Mark went into the room? Well, I was just wondering. Have you noticed the other rooms, the billiard room, the library, and so on, said Cayley. I've only just thought about it a while. I've been sitting out here. You live here. Haven't you ever noticed them? Cayley sat considering, with his head on one side. It seems rather absurd, you know, but I can't say that I have. He turned to Bill. Have you? Good Lord, no. I should never worry about a thing like that. I'm sure you wouldn't, laughed Antony. Well, we can have a look when we go in. If the other keys are outside, then this one was probably outside too. And in that case, well, it makes it more interesting. Cayley said nothing. Bill chewed a piece of grass and then said, Does it make much difference? It makes it more hard to understand what happened in there. Take your accidental theory and see where you get to. No instinctive turning of the key now, is there? He's got to open the door to get it. And opening the door means showing his head to anybody in the hall, his cousin, for instance, whom he left there just 2 minutes ago. Is a man in Mark's state of mind, frightened to death lest he should be found with the body, going to do anything so foolhardy as that? He needn't have been afraid of me, said Cayley. Then why didn't you call for him? Or why didn't he call for you, I should say? He knew you were out and about. You could have advised him. Heaven knows he wanted advice. But the whole theory of Mark's escape is that he was afraid of you and of everybody else, and that he had no other idea but to get out of the room himself and prevent you or the servants from coming into it. If the key had been on the outside, he would probably have locked the door. If it were on the outside, he almost certainly wouldn't. Yes, I expect you're right, said Bill thoughtfully, unless he took the key with him and locked the door at once. Exactly. But in that case, you would have to build up a new theory entirely. You mean that it makes it seem more deliberate? Yes, that certainly. But it also seems to make Mark out an absolute idiot. Just suppose for a moment that for urgent reasons, which neither of you know anything about, he had wished to get rid of his brother. Who would have gone and who would have done it like that? just killed him and then run away. Why? That's practically suicide. Suicide whilst of unsound mind. No, if you really wanted to remove an undesirable brother, you would do it in a little bit more of a clever way than that. You begin by treating him as a friend, as to avoid suspicion. And when you did kill him at last, you would try to make it look like an accident, or suicide, or the work of some other man, wouldn't you? You mean you'd give yourself a bit of a run for your money? Yes, that's what I mean. If you were going to do it deliberately, that is to say, and lock yourself in before you begin. Cayley had been silent, apparently thinking over the new idea. With his eyes still on the ground, he said now, I hold to my opinion that it was purely accidental and that Mark lost his head and ran away. But what about the key? Asked Bill. We don't know yet that the keys were outside. I don't at all agree with Mr. Gillingham that the keys of the downstairs rooms are always outside the doors. Sometimes they are, no doubt, but I think we shall probably find that these are inside. Oh well, of course, if they are inside, then your original theory is probably the correct one. Having often seen them outside, I just wondered, that's all. You asked me to be quite frank. You know, and tell you what I thought. But no doubt you're right, and we shall find them inside, as you say. Even if the key was outside, went on Cayley stubbornly, I think it might have been accidental. He might have taken it with him, knowing that the interview would be an unpleasant one and not wishing to be interrupted. But he had just told you to stand by in case he wanted you, so why should he lock you out? Besides, I should think that if a man were going to have an unpleasant interview with a threatening relation, the last thing he would want to do would be to barricade himself in with him. He would want to open the doors and say, "Get out!" Cayley was silent, but his mouth looked obstinate. Antony gave a little apologetic laugh and stood up. Well, come on, Bill, he said. We ought to be stepping. He held out his hand and pulled his friend up. Then, turning to Cayley, went on, You must forgive me if I have let my thoughts run on, or rather, I was considering the matter purely as an outsider, just as a problem. I mean, which didn't concern the happiness of any of my friends. That's all right, Mr. Gillingham, said Cayley, standing up too. It is for you to make allowances for me. I am sure you will. You say that you're going up to the inn now. About your bag? Yes. He looked up at the sun and then around at the parkland stretching about the house. Let me see. It's over in that direction, isn't it? He pointed southwards. Can we get to the village that way, or must we go by the road? I'll show you, my boy, said Bill. Bill will show you. The park reaches almost as far as their village. Then I'll send the car round in about half an hour. Thanks very much. Cayley nodded and turned to go to the house. Antony took hold of Bill's arm and walked off with him in the opposite direction. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 6 and the end of our story for tonight. Please join me again tomorrow night to begin chapter 7. This has been Indiana Homes. Thank you all for joining me for another story time. Good night and love to all. Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.